equitable access to health products and refers as to the importance of ensuring the principles of sustainability, availability, and accessibility of safe, effective, and quality health products, which more than ever are fundamental to tackling the current pandemic. It also stresses the need to guarantee the production, supply chain, and equitable distribution of essential health products to our fellow citizens. Finally, considering the potentially devastating economic and social repercussions for health, particularly for developing countries, this section also calls for effective international cooperation in order to strengthen our health systems for this and future pandemics. Knowing that we all share these values, Portugal joins this call to action and its commitment to the collective success in combating COVID-19. Thank you very much for your attention.
Dr. Ivo, thank you very much. We do now have a representative from South Africa. Now we have the Health Minister, the Honourable Minister, Dr. Zwelini Mkhize, who is on the line for us. Dr. Mkhize, please, your supporting statement for this initiative.
Very much, Excellencies, from South Africa, on behalf of President Ramaphosa, I take this opportunity to congratulate the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, and the President of the Republic of Costa Rica, His Excellency, Mr. Carlos Alvaro Quesada, for launching this important initiative. We also appreciate the cross-regional efforts to realize equitable global access to COVID-19 health technologies as a critical response measure, as now more than ever, the world needs this solidarity and cooperation to pool knowledge, intellectual property, and data for existing and new diagnostics, therapeutics, vaccines, and for the detection, prevention, and treatment of COVID-19. The solidarity call to action calls on key stakeholders and the global community to commit to undertaking actions which are urgently needed to advance the sharing of knowledge, intellectual property, and data that will benefit all humanity. It is also an important complement to the ACT Accelerator, which was launched a few weeks ago, which aims at making diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines for COVID-19 accessible on the basis of need worldwide. We'd also like to emphasize the importance of governments and international partners uniting around a global guarantee that ensures that when a safe and it is produced rapidly, at scale, and made available to all the people in all countries free of charge. We therefore call upon member states and the international community to support the solidarity call to action to promote health and to ensure the achievement of universal health coverage globally.
Why do we need this patent pool right now in the middle of this pandemic? Why is it necessary? There we go. Good. It said that the host wouldn't unmute me. Well, it's absolutely necessary because there's no other choice. I mean, really, from the policy perspective, because this is in fact a policy proposal, we need to frame it as actively shaping and creating this market in the way that needs to be governed to satisfy the mission, which is a vaccine that is globally accessible for free around the world. And that really means making sure that we govern the process from the intellectual property, which of course this common pool is focusing on, the pricing, the manufacturing capability, the international collaboration and solidarity instead of competition between countries. But to do that, it really means also thinking through what does it mean when countries globally have been putting in billions really into the health innovation market. And then unfortunately, unlike the military, when they spend money on areas that they need, they then govern the process to make sure they win the war. Even though I don't like the war narrative, it does actually mean governing this process in such a way that the pricing, the IPR, the licensing, is done in such a way to really foster what the 21st century is about, which is collective intelligence. Okay, Mariana, that's really interesting. I want to bring in a fellow economist now. Professor Joseph Stiglitz is a professor at Columbia University. Professor, I'm wondering whether you agree with that, whether you think this type of technology access pool is necessary for the distribution of health technologies whenever we come up with them.
Absolutely. Intellectual property is a social construction that is designed to promote innovation. But in this particular case, the government is taking the key role in financing the research, and having those ideas. The most important input into any research is other ideas, and that's why this pool of ideas is absolutely essential if there's going to be the fastest innovation possible. And speed is extraordinarily important in dealing with this pandemic. The longer it lasts, the more people die, but the worse the devastation for the economy. So it's actually important in this case, especially, that there be this kind of patent pool, that this knowledge be used quickly for the benefit of everybody in our global community.
I'm going to try and connect now with Dr. Jacques Dubochet. I'm hoping that he's on the line as well. Dr. Jacques Dubochet is a Swiss scientist. He's also a Nobel laureate. Sir, I can see you. Wonderful. I know that you've advocated for open science. I'm wondering if you can just explain to all of us what exactly you mean by that, and the role that you think that science should play going forward with this initiative.
Oui, vous voyez
Thank you. COVID-19 is a very interesting example of a shared problem. It's a problem for all of us. It doesn't discriminate. And as long as we have one person sick with COVID-19 anywhere in the world, we're all potentially going to be sick with COVID-19, because as long as you have a patient somewhere, then the virus has an opportunity to come back. So it's a shared problem. However, if you have a shared problem, you need shared tools to tackle it. And the shared tools we have is the knowledge that everybody is acquiring very quickly as we go through this pandemic, and which we hope one day will help us to take better care of patients and cure them. That's why we need any treatments, vaccines, technologies to be a common good, and that is the basic aim of this initiative. This is an extraordinary undertaking, a very positive undertaking, a visible one that all of us need. And it might help us to overcome some of our other common problems and turn those into common good as well. I'm thinking particularly about the quality of life, which is deteriorating worldwide, and the climate change. We'll get out of the pandemic, and we are on the way to getting out of it as a result of our cooperation and collaboration now.
Boa sorte a todos nós.
Dr. Dubochet, many thanks. Who is the ad interim executive director at UNITAID. Mr. Duneton, if you can hear me, I hope you can. UNITAID is a huge WHO partner and very much involved in this particular initiative. Can you just describe for those watching in the media, the public as well, what exactly UNITAID's role will be with rolling out this type of pool?
Hello, good afternoon and good morning for everybody. I hope you can hear me. So it's quite important as an initiative and call for action. UNITAID is fully involved in the development of therapeutic and diagnostic under the ACT call for action, and we are working closely with partners, but also with WHO, of course. And finding the right medicines, the right diagnostic and the right vaccine is not sufficient. As it was said, it's quite important to make sure that it can be affordable everywhere at a low price. As UNITAID, we have a lot of experience in making the connection between the innovation and, of course, the scale-up. And we have created 10 years ago now the medicine patent pool that is coping with of course, the industry to make affordable medicine for HIV and, of course, hepatitis C. It is a great success because now, as I speak, we have a million of people who can benefit from the latest innovation to fight HIV. And I think that this initiative today is very important also to make sure that we will have equitable access for the new vaccine, for the treatment that we need to fight COVID-19.
Thank you. Let's bring in Greg Alton. Greg is a former Chief Patents Officer for Gilead. Greg, if you can hear me, and I hope you can, we're obviously talking about patents now and intellectual property. I'm wondering, and I'm sure many other people watching this will be wondering as well, with all good intentions aside, what will it take to get companies on board to share their intellectual property and their knowledge?
Great. I think I'm on mute. Is that?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay, great. So first, let me just hold on. I got something weird on my screen here. Let me just start with, I think that, and Dr. Tedros said this initially, I'm a big supporter of intellectual property and the role that the industry's played in bringing medicine forward. However, with some things, I think that, the reason I'm very supportive of this call to action. First of all, in terms of fair and equitable access, I do think it would be fantastic to see the industry come forward and commit to working with the medicines patent pool or other mechanisms to make the intellectual property that comes out of the products that we develop, whether they're vaccines, therapeutics, or diagnostics, to be produced by generic manufacturers and then made available in fair and equitable terms globally. I do think to make this happen, we have to expect and respect that different companies will have different concerns that they're going to have to be addressed around whether, if this is truly voluntary, geographies around different tierings of geographies, understanding that the poorest countries of the world, what's fair and equitable for them will differ from middle income countries, that will differ from wealthy countries. That's the way the industry is going to look at this. I think they're going to look at protection around their commercial interests, their indications, their uses. But I do think this can be done. We've seen this done we did in HIV, we've done this in hepatitis. I do think it's a good model, and I think I would love to see the industry come forward today while these products are being developed and make a commitment to make these products available for generic production, for local production, and get to what those terms are that will be acceptable. And it's going to vary from country to country. The other thing I just want to touch on why I'm very excited about this call to action is we don't have these products yet. We do not have the therapeutics. We do not have the vaccines. We do not have the diagnostics we need. I do also believe that the component of pooling knowledge, pooling data, creating a forum where this data can be shared to create those new breakthrough products is more important today given this epidemic than we've ever seen before. The human and economic costs. We cannot wait for the typical development timeline of a vaccine or a therapeutic. And I think this is an opportunity to see if this pooling of knowledge, sharing of information, sharing of intellectual property, of breaking down these barriers can expedite that development and allow these breakthroughs to come through. And if this works in COVID-19 or in this particular epidemic, maybe then this model could be used for some of the neglected diseases around the world that the current IP and industry model doesn't work well for.
Greg, thank you. I wonder if I can just bring back Professor Joseph Stiglitz to comment on that, really. I'm wondering whether, Professor, you think that we can perhaps use this concept of a patent pool as an opportunity to prepare for future crises as well?
Oh, very much so. And what I wanted to emphasize are a couple points. One, the production of knowledge, as I said before, the most important ingredient is other knowledge. And when speed is important, as it is in this pandemic, you want that knowledge to be shared very quickly. What's interesting is that talking to my friends who are in the research community, that is happening at the individual level. But the question is, will the corporate level, will the institutional level buy into this? And what I find so exciting is the commitments being made all over the world in support of this. There's a second aspect that I want to highlight, which is we're going to need billions of doses of whatever medicines are going to be produced. That means it's really important to scale up at a low price. And the point, as long as this disease is going on in any part of the world, we're all going to be vulnerable. So it's really important in the interest of all of us that the prices be low. And that's not going to be achieved through monopoly pricing of the drug companies. It's only going to be true if we make sure that there's access to generics, to local producers, the widest dispersion of production. Now, there has to be return to those who are making their research, although much of the money is coming from the government. We should be clear about that. It's been de-risked. But we can do that through royalties, through charging for appropriate prices. That can be done within the patent pool. But what is really important here is the prioritization of speed and price accessibility. And that's really the idea behind this initiative, which I really commend you for.
And Mariana Mazzucato, I believe you want to come in on this.
Yes, I mean, I really think this is going to be the moment to make sure that we walk the talk of what kind of public-private collaborations should be in a space like this. And I don't think hepatitis C is a good example, with all due respect, Mr. Alton. This is actually the area where so many have written about, an area which received billions from, for example, the National Institutes of Health, 10 years of research, and then ultimately was marketed for $84,000 for a 12-week course, 1 pill a day. Now, that whole issue of how can we actually produce, again, as I was saying before, along the whole value chain, so governing the patent system, as we're talking about today, but also the pricing system that really reflects that collective effort that we're making in so many different parts of the health industry. This is a problem that goes beyond vaccines. Why this initiative is so important is we cannot risk getting it wrong. We have to today use this almost as a sandbox that hopefully will also create lessons for other parts of the sector. And in terms of what Joseph Stiglitz was saying, of course patents are important. They have simply been massively abused. They are too upstream. We today are patenting the tools for research. They're way too strong, hard to license. They're too wide. They're used for strategic reasons. So again, using this moment to also think much more broadly, how can we make patents do what they were meant to do in the beginning instead of really just fueling a lot of rents and monopoly power?
Mariana, thank you. Charles Gore is the Executive Director of the Medicines Patent Pool, which Dr. Tedros mentioned at the beginning of this launch. And Charles Gore, if you can hear me clearly, based on your experience at MPP, when you have a patent pool already, can this scale and level of cooperation work? Does it work in practice?
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. And just before I answer your question, I'd like to thank WHO and the Director General, Costa Rica, and President Alvarado for inviting us to be part of this initiative. Perhaps I should just talk a little bit about our history to answer your question. So we were set up by Unitaid in 2010 as a public health organization to do voluntary licensing to enable access to HIV medicines and also to facilitate the development of new treatments in the form of, for example, pediatric combinations, single pill combinations, but also to make sure that, first of all, access was as quick as possible and also as equitable as possible, as Dr. Tedros said, to make sure that no one was left behind. And the success of that model led to the global community asking us to expand our mandate, firstly to hepatitis C and TB, and then more recently to any patented medicine on the WHO essential medicines list. And the model involves, first of all, working with experts and the affected communities and civil society to identify the needs, then working with the pharmaceutical industry to actually get the licenses, which we can then sub-license to many generic manufacturers that allows both scale up to meet large demands, but also competition between the generic manufacturers to drive the price down. And then finally, with also governments and the affected communities, to let them know what is available, to make sure that they do access these affordable but high quality drugs as quickly as possible. And finally, to manage this whole process. I think you can see from the fact that, as Philippe Duneton mentioned, we've had a huge impact. I'd just like to mention that our generic manufacturers have now delivered 12 billion doses in the last 10 years. And based on that, our board at the beginning of the COVID crisis decided that we should offer that expertise and experience to the global community if it would be useful, and consequently expanded our mandate to include anything that could be useful for COVID-19. And so we're now in this position of being very willing to offer that expertise and experience in the form of a pool to try and make sure that actually initiatives like this really deliver. So we hope that we will have an important role in the operationalization of this important initiative. And we would like to think that we will be able to have the kind of impact we've had in HIV in COVID-19 as well. Thank you.
Charles Gore, thank you very much. Interesting to see that, you know, what you were saying about how the open licensing model does work, has been working already. And we've been hearing from experts and from the field of academia. Let's bring in civil society now. I want to speak to Achal Prabhala, who is from the coordinator, rather, of Accessibsa project in India. Achal, I hope you can hear me and I hope we can see you. Tell us then, what is the role of civil society in this pool initiative? Oh, I think you may have dropped off. Apologies. Okay, let's move on then. Joshua Setipa is from the UN Technology Bank. He is the managing director. I hope that Joshua, you're on the call then. I'm wondering how can we ensure then that medicines are, as and when they become available, that they are then available on an equitable basis across the world? Question there for Joshua Setipa of the UN Technology Bank. No, I think, okay, we will move on. Anna Marriott, I believe we do have Anna Marriott. Anna Marriott is the health policy manager for Oxfam. Anna, there's been quite a lot of talk already about HIV and AIDS and the response to the crisis then. I'm wondering how conditions today compare with conditions then, and whether we are better equipped today to deal with this pandemic. Oh, if you just need to unmute yourself, please. There we go. Oh, no, still can't hear you. No, still can't quite hear you. Let me just see if we can get you just to unmute your microphone. If not, then perhaps I can turn back to one of our esteemed economists who've been joining us already. Perhaps, Mariano, I know you're still on the call. I can see you nodding away there. If you wanted to unmute yourself. Your thoughts on what we've been hearing then about using previous models or pre-existing models in order to move further with a response to COVID-19. And again, if you could unmute yourself.
We can't. Okay, here we go. Yes.
Okay.
I think the reason the others are having a problem, on our screen it says the host has muted us. So when we try to unmute, it doesn't work. So whoever the host is, if you can ask them to.
I will. I hold my hands up and say I'm not the host.
Sure. So, this is a huge issue. Just one thing that I think is really important is that currently this is only voluntary. What I have been arguing actually for some time is that this could actually become more mandatory. The reason, just as an example, because this shouldn't be pie in the sky, the reason we had, at least in the US, one of the most innovative private R&D departments in AT&T, it later became Bell Labs, a very famous research and development department, was that there was conditions attached to the public subsidy that AT&T AT&T was getting, to make sure that they actually reinvested their profits back into innovation and big innovation beyond telecoms. The history of conditionality, sector by sector, does exist. And this is strangely one where for some reason we haven't made conditions on the governance of areas like patents to be present when you have this very high amount of public investment that both Joseph Stiglitz and I have been talking about. Again, 40 billion a year just in the US, but actually if you look globally, there's trillions of pounds, euros, different currencies being put into health innovation, and making sure that that public investment is also conditional on a governance of the system to actually meet a public interest test. I think, this could actually become the moment to do that, because as long as it's just voluntary and, every country negotiates it depending on bilateral relationships, it doesn't get us what we're actually talking about here. COVID has woken us up that, global health only makes sense when it's global. We are all only as safe as our neighbor is in our city, in our nation, and then globally. Had this epidemic begun in Africa, where health systems are actually much weaker than in China, we would globally be worse off. So governing this system in such a way that has strong public interest metrics, I think, is the big innovation that we all need right now.
Yeah. Anna Marriott, we could see you before, we couldn't quite hear you, but I believe your sound has been restored for us. I was asking you about the comparisons we can make today between what happened with HIV and AIDS and the response, or the climate, the conditions that we're operating in today.
So I think many of those conditions of inequality in access are still very real today. The very big difference that we're facing now is that this is a global crisis where everybody on the planet needs access to these technologies. And so this is a very welcome step forward today to put those commitments, those nice commitments that we've heard about global public goods, to realize those commitments in practical terms. But this is only going to work if every government steps up to the table and makes those commitments. And we're very, very welcome at the governments that have taken leadership today, but we need all governments to come to the table along with pharmaceutical companies. And I will say that some of the reactions from some pharmaceutical players today about this initiative is disappointing. We really need them to properly engage with the details of this pool, step up to the table. But alongside that, I just want to reassert this point that we are seeing millions of taxpayers' money being invested in the research and development for the medical solutions for this. We do need to see those conditions attached that will force the pooling, force the sharing of these solutions to this pandemic. The scale of the crisis is too big, it's too vast to leave it to the voluntary and philanthropic efforts of pharmaceutical companies.
Anna, thank you. Achal Pravala, we were hoping to speak to you earlier, and I believe you're back with us again now. I was asking you about civil society and the role that civil society can have, not just in this particular technology access pool, but also just in response to COVID-19 in general.
Yeah, well, look, civil society has a limited role to play here. Civil society can put pressure on national governments, and national governments, especially those governments which have the capacity to manufacture tests and treatments and vaccines, who also have the political will to do what they need to do with intellectual property monopolies, can make some efforts to do their bit to contain the pandemic. But the truth is that we need the COVID-19 technology pool to succeed, because it's really the best shot that the world has. Most countries in the world don't have the capacity to be able to manufacture what they need, even without the presence of monopolies that will thwart their ability to do so. But in saying so, we need to have a couple of things in place. The first is participation. We need to have the participation of rich countries. And along with that participation, we need to have the leverage that rich countries have in terms of their investment and buying of medical technologies, so that they can then contribute to the pool. But we also need to look at the scope of the pool. In the past, a lot of access licenses have have been satisfied to stop at poor countries and getting access to poor countries. I think what we need to look at here is getting access to poor people wherever they live, whether they live in poor countries, whether they live in what are called middle-income countries, or indeed whether they live in rich countries. I think if we go by the access models of the past, they've